So I was delighted when I was invited to speak about Ahimsa because I'm one of 6 kids. There are 5 generations of my family living nearby, so I've had plenty of real-time opportunity to practice Ahimsa, study Ahimsa, and I had an amazing temper as a child, like the kind where you hold your breath and pass out. I mean, I would fight anyone, stand up to anyone, it didn't matter at all. I was immune to pain, so you couldn't even spank me hard enough to get me to calm down. So I had a lot of opportunity, real life experience. And during the 29 years that Gurudev was in the body and that I had the honor of being his student, he called me many times on the phone. We spent a lot of personal as well as guru-disciple time together. And one of the times he called me, he said, "You need to learn to control your anger." So I was like, okay. Didn't give me any guidance, but I was like, okay, I'll take that to heart. I'll figure it out. I'll learn how to do that, which was useful information to have from your guru. Very kind. He was always very kind to me, but clear, very clear. So you may have noticed that I titled the talk tonight, "First, Do No Harm." Is anyone familiar with that phrase? Can you tell me where it came from?
Star Trek?
Yeah, Hippocrates.
Oh.
It's a derivative of the Hippocratic Oath. So Hippocrates was the father of Western medicine in Greece, and he created the first bioethics document, the value system and the ethics that healers were supposed to follow. And in the Hippocratic Oath, it's a little bit more detailed. When the Greek is translated into English, it says, "I will abstain from intentionally doing harm or, hurting someone," basically. You can Google it if you want the exact text. But in around the 1900s, a surgeon adapted it to the Latin, "First, do no harm." And that's what stuck. And even to today, nurses and doctors have to take a version of the Hippocratic Oath where they say, first, they will not harm the person that they're helping. So we're all yogis, or most of us are yogis. So we know the Yamas and Yamas, right? Anybody not familiar with the Yamas and Yamas? I pray everyone is. They have beautiful bookends, the Yamas and the Yamas. We have Ahimsa, non-harming on one end, and Ishvara Pranidhanam, surrender on the other, and humility. And they bookend the Yamas and the Yamas. So Ahimsa is like our prime directive. It's what we're measuring all the other Yamas and Yamas against, right? So we're always saying, Satya, can I be truthful? Can I speak my truth in a non-harming way? And again, with the Yamas and Niyamas, it's our intention. It's what we intend to do. So are we going to hurt people in this life, in this body? Guaranteed. It's going to happen. We are going to offend someone. We are going to unintentionally hurt someone, maybe even intentionally hurt someone, but it's going to happen. But if we have the intention to not harm, that will guide our actions a lot of times. So Ahimsa, you don't want to just practice Ahimsa on the physical level. That's the easiest version of Ahimsa. It's the simplest because behavior modification actually isn't that difficult. If you have ever had an anger management problem, you might disagree. You might go, it's hard. It's hard to keep your body still and to keep yourself from throwing something or smacking something or that kind of thing when you're feeling angry. But it is actually the easiest. Behavior modification doesn't require a lot of effort. It takes 21 days to 6 months of repeated practice to break a habit. All it requires is interest. You just have to want to no longer harm someone. You have to desire that. And it's particularly tricky in a family like mine where there's a big family and we like to debate and we like to argue and we like to get into intense discussions, and there were 6 of us and I'm in my 50s, so I grew up in the age where spanking was allowed, that kind of thing. And, you're fighting with your siblings and stuff. So there's a lot of conditioning that can occur at a very young age for how to behave when you're feeling a very strong, intense, I'm only going to say negative once this time, negative emotion. I'll just say intense emotion from now on, because I don't want you to get the impression that anger or grief or sadness is negative. It's just an emotion that arises within us and can subside naturally. We don't have to respond. But when we express in a very intense emotional state, we often hurt ourselves or other people. And when we suppress a very intense emotion, we can hurt ourselves. Right? So can you see how expressing and suppression can both harm? There's another way. There's embracing or meditating. There's identifying the emotion, feeling the emotion, using the breath, the 3-part breath to gain resiliency in your nervous system so that you have the capacity to contain what is arising within you. You let it rise, you let it pass, and then you open your mouth or move your body. Because if you come from that triggered, reactive place, there will be a lot of apologizing to be done afterwards. Because we don't intend to harm anyone. We don't mean to harm anyone, right? So again, the physical aspect, much easier. Just keep your body still. Whenever you're feeling those intense emotions that make you want to hurt someone, keep your body still. Or walk. Do something healthy, right? Do some yoga, do some pranayama. Don't suppress it. Don't do these techniques so that you're suppressing the emotion, but just if you need to burn up a little energy, exercise can help you do that when you're feeling angry. So and again, the verbal aspect of ahimsa is the same, in a way similar as to the physical aspect, because it's just keeping your mouth shut. So it's physical behavior modification. Don't speak when you're feeling an intense emotion. Now, in close relationship, which I am, I've been married almost 30 years. I have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. 3 children and 3 grandchildren. I have a lot. Sorry, I actually technically have like 6 because they all have significant others. 6 children and 3 grandchildren, but it's okay. But the bottom line is that if you try to communicate when you're feeling an intense emotion, you will inadvertently oftentimes harm people. Not always. If you are really skilled in nonviolent communication, your words may not harm the other person if you speak. But we are also aware of the energetic component, the prana that's involved, right? We have the 5 bodies. We have the physical. We have the emotional. We have the energetic. We have the emotional, mental, sensory body. We have the intellectual and the joy, right? We have all 5 of them. So if you communicate from an intensely emotional place, that prana is going out of you like a rocket. So much, much more kind and gentle to learn to keep your mouth shut until the emotion naturally subsides. And then when the emotion naturally subsides, you can look back with your wise mind, your prefrontal cortex, you can look back and you can say, what do I need? What is important for me to communicate? Because again, Satya comes next. Speak your truth. Have the courage to speak your truth and what's important to you. So then you analyze and you go, okay, I need more snuggle time. I need to feel listened to. I need to feel appreciated. Whatever it is that is your truth. But when you communicate that in a nonviolent way without the intensity of the emotion behind it, people can hear you. Even if you're telling them something that maybe would be difficult to hear, they can hear you. And if you use the additional skill of nonviolent communication, which is its own course, basically, a whole book and course and everything, you can Google it or ask Mindy. Sorry, Mindy, didn't mean to point you out, Mindy, but she would be my reference in this room for nonviolent communication. If you can use those additional skills, then you're even better at communicating. But it's not about holding everything in all the time. It's about vowing to not harm people, and yourself included. And so you need to speak your truth, right? Otherwise it can bring harm to you if you're walking around and you're feeling things and you're wanting things, but you're not communicating about it at all. You're just keeping it all to yourself. That can hurt you also. Now, so we've got the like keep your mouth shut when you're feeling an intense emotion, because that energy will come at people, and what will happen? They'll defend. They'll immediately defend against what you're saying. So if you feel like you're standing up in anger and you are defending the downtrodden, if you do it in an angry way, people will block you. If you find a way to speak your truth peacefully, even the person who is on the opposite side of the story takes the 180 position different than you, 180 degree different position, can hear you. They can hear you, and you can communicate about it and find some common ground and some way to talk about difficult issues. Okay, so keep your mouth shut when you're feeling emotional, and we're yogis. So yogis understand the power of the mind. They understand the power of their thoughts. So with Ahimsa, we also don't get to think harm for people that we don't like, and people that we think are doing a lot of harm in the world. Watch the news when you're ready to practice this one. Any channel will do. It won't matter which one it is. When you're ready to go, okay, I've mastered non-harming in my physical realm. I've mastered non-harming in my verbal realm without suppressing or expressing. When you're ready to master non-harming, try that. Because we are yogis, so we understand the power of the mind. This is just as important, if not more important. Everything that it's manifested around us right now came from someone's thought. The iPhone, somebody thought of that. The blanket, somebody thought of that. The glass, somebody thought of that. Everything in creation started with someone thinking about it. So if we're committed to non-harming, we can't even think terrible things about people. Now, the good news is your mind can only do one thing at a time. There's no such thing as multitasking. It's a myth. Now that they have functional MRIs where they're videotaping how your brain works, and they can see the MRI in movement, they can see that the electrical activity is just jumping all over the place from here to here to here to here really quickly, but it's still only on one point at a time. So if in the moment that you're feeling that intense emotion, because it's usually an emotion that causes us to do harm. Usually, unless we have other special qualities I'm not going to go into, usually we are emotionally driven and reacting in a way that causes harm. So because our mind can only think of one thing at a time, when that emotion arises in us, if we label it, whatever word describes that emotion for us, anger, grief, sadness, fear, jealousy, envy, whatever, and we just use the word to ground us with the breath in what we're feeling, and just really feel, even in our body, where that emotion is, where are we feeling it? Is it in our chest? Is it in our stomach? Do we have a headache? Are we feeling like we're getting choked? Pay attention to how you're feeling and use the word to block your mind from the shame, blame story that we do. When we feel triggered, our minds want to figure it out. So we start immediately telling a story of shame and blame. So it's either our fault or their fault, right? How could I have gotten into this situation again? Why am I doing this again? How could that person have done that? Aren't they a yogi? Aren't they supposed to be mindful? What's happening here, right? We tell this whole narrative while we're feeling this intense emotion. So we're energetically with our prana feeding this story like it's a fire within us. And if you can reclaim your power and just say, no, I'm just going to stick with what I'm feeling. I'm just going to feel it. And I'm going to wait until it passes. Now, when you first try this particular technique of managing your emotions and non-harming in Ahimsa, it doesn't happen immediately. You have to sit with whatever you're feeling for a long time. It doesn't happen right off the bat. But over time, your emotional body, your kosha, your manomaya kosha starts to trust you and starts to believe that you're going to honor it and hear it, and it is an integral part of your vehicle that the divine light of consciousness is experiencing this life through, right? And it'll get faster, super fast, to the point where you come into a room and you're in a meeting, you get triggered because that person says that same thing they've been saying for 40 years and you're, right? But it happens so quickly. The anger and frustration happens and passes so quickly because of your skill at allowing the emotions to come and go that the room isn't even actually sure if you got upset. Because you know how we can feel? We can feel when we walk into a room and there's some not great stuff going on. If two people are fighting or if two people are really attracted to each other, you walk into a room, you can feel all this, and we're all feeling it all the time. So when you learn to master this, it'll be such a quick blip. People won't actually be sure that that happened, right? So the yamas and niyamas are primarily about believing you are the personal I, right? You believe you are yourself, right? And you believe that you're in control of what you can do. And while you're in that mindset and while you're in that belief system, you're repairing your instrument, your body, mind, emotions. You're healing them, repairing them, developing skillful habits, so that when you merge and have a unitive consciousness event and you are one with everything, and then you realize the divine is doing everything through you, that personality that you release on the world is kind and compassionate. It's naturally habitually behaving in the ways of the yamas and niyamas. It's just part of your personality. Okay? But eventually you got to let go. But this is not the night for that talk. We'll talk about that another time. Eventually you got to if you don't let go, you can overachieve and you can end up, Gurudev used to say, he didn't want us looking like we accidentally ate a lemon. And we're all like, because we're so austere and we're trying so hard to be so perfect all the time. This human form will never be the kind of perfect that we imagine it will be when you master the yamas and niyamas. It's just not going to happen. This human form is part of duality. And so a couple months ago, I started using the term getting rid of your enlightenment checklist, because so often we have a list of things that we believe will happen when we become enlightened. We will never feel angry again. We will never feel sad again. We'll never hurt anyone again. We'll never be hurt again. Maybe we'll never sleep again, and we'll never eat again, and we won't go to the bathroom either, right? We have this list of things that we think is going to happen when we realize our true self, right? But the yamas and niyamas are all about establishing those habits, but we have to let go at some point. We have to say enough. I'm good enough. It's okay. And so when it comes specifically to the yamas and niyamas, we need spiritual buddies. We need people, at least two, who are willing to give us loving, kind, honest feedback about our behavior and our actions. Right? Okay, I'm going to tell the story since you reminded me when you first came in class. So Gurudev used to tell a story about the sage in India who went up to a cave to master anger, right? And he meditates, he masters anger. He comes down into the village. The first person he meets, he says, I've been practicing for all these years and now I've mastered anger. And the first guy he meets says, oh, really? Oh my gosh, are you sure? Yes, I have mastered anger. Really? I don't know. That's really hard to do. I don't think you really have. I have mastered anger. really? I don't know. I don't think I believe you. I'm sorry. I hear what you're saying, but I don't really believe you. Prove it. I have mastered anger. And he just gets angrier and angrier, right? Because he didn't get tested. He's sitting there in isolation, right? It's easy to practice the yamas and the yamas in isolation, right? It's in community, in families, in intense, intimate relationships where we get to see how well we're actually doing. So have a spiritual buddy. Even if you spend most of your time in meditation and you spend most of your time observing silence and you spend a lot of your time alone in your sadhana because you have sort of a sannyasin kind of vibe about you or something, renunciate vibe about you, still have at least 2 spiritual buddies who care about you genuinely. You don't have a lot of hurtful history between you, and you believe that they'll tell you the truth. So that when something happens and somebody gives you feedback and you're not sure, you're uncertain about that, or a situation deteriorates in a way that you weren't predicting, or somebody storms out of the room and you don't know what happened, you can go to your spiritual buddy and you can explain the situation to them, and they can be your mirror to show you your blind spots. Because 90% of what we do is subconscious. Only 10% is conscious. So most of what we're doing is reacting and hopefully responding to the situations around us. Okay, I don't want to spend the whole evening talking. I want to hear a little bit from you guys as well. So would anyone like to share a technique that they have used in mastering Ahimsa, either in thought, word, or deed? Anyone want to share?
I wanted to ask a question.
Of course, questions are good too.
One of my spiritual buddies, I reflected something to him, and he was really, really passive-aggressive with me. I mean, threw it right back to me, did not take it in, but I meant this in, I trust him implicitly, and that he doesn't trust me, or would, just dismiss something that I said, really hurt me. And it was like, what is going on? But he took what I said and just nullified it. Yeah. So, yeah.
I don't know the specifics of that particular situation. I'm hearing what you're saying, and with the little sketch that you just gave me, that's not the kind of spiritual buddy that you're looking for. You're looking for someone who has a little bit more skill in communicating feedback and who has a way of truthfully sharing hard information in a gentle way. Yes.
The funny part about it is he's taking a course on nonviolent communication.
Oh, well.
Maybe it was practice. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. So, for 29 years, I was giving Gurudev my spiritual diaries and reporting into him regularly and getting feedback from him regularly. And for me, he was always kind. He was always gentle but firm. So he was clear but kind. And that's what you're looking for in a spiritual buddy. You're looking for someone who's clear and kind. And who is patient. Because we're talking about our blind spots. And when it comes to non-harming, it is our naturally programmed genetic habit to defend ourselves. Our prime objective as a human being, our biology is programmed to survive and defend ourselves. So this is like unconscious, subconscious, reactive behavior. This is really deep stuff. This is like brainstem, midbrain. We're not talking about prefrontal cortex, wives' mind, I'm looking back and reflecting, right? This is like how we're unconsciously moving through life. We're not always ready to receive that feedback because it's our blind spot and we're in the dark. And so it might even take 20 times saying, learn to keep your mouth shut when you're angry. You will have healthier, more joyful, more pleasant relationships. learn to feel your anger fully without taking it out on others. Do it by yourself. And can you imagine how this might resemble one of the Yamas, sitting and feeling your emotions without bringing anyone into your misery with you? Does this sound familiar? Close. Tapasya. Close. Swadhyaya too, because it's self-reflection, self-analysis, yeah. But I'm thinking in terms of the burning, like when an intense emotion comes up in you, it hurts like the dickens. And to not bring anyone else into the misery with you is quite a skill. And it's a commitment to ahimsa. It's to say, I am in tremendous pain right now, and I'm not going to bring anyone down with me. I'm hurting, but I'm going to feel that burning, that tapasya. But yeah, Swadhyaya is required because you need to be self-reflective. You need to be contemplative. You need to be able to, sit with and analyze and understand what's going on. But sometimes we think of the yamas and niyamas because they're abstinences and their observances. We think of them as suppressive or controlling. Like somehow we're going to control or suppress our way through humanity, being human, right? That's not the case. What we're learning to fully embrace both the shadow and the light within us. Fully embrace it. Feel that, no spiritual bypassing, feel that. And still behave in a way that's kind and loving to the people around us. Somehow manage that terrain. It's tricky. So I would recommend you get another spiritual buddy. No offense to your friend if they happen to be here right now. Please forgive me for that statement. But and that's the other thing. We are going to hurt people. So learning to be comfortable with authentically apologizing is very wise, because at least that can help a little when you genuinely apologize for harming someone. Yes, John.
Yeah, I just think of a term you use, setting context, right? Like if I want to offer somebody feedback, first I would go to them and say, I have some feedback I'd like to offer you in a loving way, if you're open to it. Are you open to receiving it? And giving them the opportunity to be like, no, I'm not in a space to hear any of that, or yeah, but later, or something like that, or yeah, I can hear that from you now. And then they're bought in, and it might be a little easier for them to receive it.
Yeah. I like that technique because it's a blend between completely unsolicited feedback, which you might notice happens occasionally in Yogaville. You may notice that we have a pattern of unsolicitedly giving people advice about how they can be better versions of themselves. So that's a nice blend. I usually recommend don't even give feedback unless someone asks. Don't even bother. Even your husband, even your wife, you have to with your children because you're responsible for them until they're 18, so you have no choice. It's your job. But if we can learn that boundary of asteya, of learning to not give without being asked. Asteya is about respecting boundaries. It's not just simply non-stealing. It's respecting boundaries. Hearing no and saying no, okay, consent. If we can learn that can also mitigate a lot of harm. Because if you offered someone feedback and they were feeling really hurt in that moment, even offering them feedback could be painful to them, right? Like, why does Jonica think I need feedback? I'm fine, right? Even though inside they're like falling apart. But you have a lot of friends who you have agreed to be that for each other. So you have a nice sangha of people who have agreed to give each other feedback. But the unsolicited feedback, that's not ahimsa. That's not. No one asked you. They don't want your advice. They don't want your opinion. Yes, Mindy.
But it's also not it doesn't feel very truthful or authentic to restrain from giving somebody feedback that you're in a relationship with.
And this is actually a common occurrence in relationships is that one person will feel, because they have that clear-mindedness to see areas in their partner that could benefit hugely by minor adjustments, they feel obligated to share that, right? But unless the person asks, they don't necessarily want that information from us. Now that's different than, having a disagreement or having something happen in relationship and then needing to talk about it afterwards. Many couples and intimate people in relationship will have an agreement that afterwards we're going to communicate about how we can be better partners in relationship. But we often justify giving unsolicited advice because we want to help. And then when I was little, I lived in a time where Free to Be You and Me, the album, came out, and we listened to it constantly because we had no television and we pretty much lived like monks when we were kids, and so we didn't really have access to anything interesting. So we listened to Free to Be You and Me a million times. And there was a song on it that said, some kind of help is the kind of help that helping's all about, and some kind of help is the kind of help we all can do without. And unsolicited feedback, we can all do without that. We are criticizing ourselves enough. Many times our internal dialogue is correcting and changing and improving and altering and how can we be better, how can we be different, how can we be kinder, more loving. We don't need that unless we're asking for it.
So, okay, I'm getting clear, but so you're equating advice with feedback?
Oh, no, both, either advice or feedback, either one, yeah. Unless it's asked for, yeah.
Which may not mean asked for in the moment. Like you might have a spiritual buddy where you're like, the context of our relationship is that this is something that we do with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like with romantic partnership, as long as it's explicit that that's something that we're going to do in our relationship,
Mm-hmm.
then when a moment comes up, then of course there's already understanding that that's going to happen.
Yes, yeah, agreed. So Gurudev was really clear with us about the violent media in particular. He had you think the ashram's strict now? Should have seen it when we were kids. It was really strict. We weren't even allowed to listen to rock and roll music. We weren't allowed to hold sticks that looked like guns because, of the influence it would have on our subconscious. So in terms of the violent media and the presence of violence, like being around violence, watching the news, watching violent movies, Gurudev said what you do is you put a fence around the tree. So you stay away. There's no shame, there's no harm, it's not bad to love things from afar and stay away from them. So when you find that the violence in a movie is disturbing you, or the violence in the media is disturbing you, or the violent lyrics are disturbing you, or violent interactions of people, maybe you go home for Christmas and the violence of your own family is disturbing you, you have permission to stay away until you gain enough strength within yourself so you become resilient enough that it doesn't affect you. Your tree gets big enough that that violence is just like wind blowing in the branches. Okay? So I had that terrible temper, right? My husband is a Marine. My parents knew about the nature of my physical temper and how I would fight anybody, anytime, right? And they literally, when my husband and I got together, they were afraid that we were going to unintentionally kill each other. Because he was a Marine who just got back from Desert Storm and had PTSD, and I had this nature, right? Luckily, they didn't know, because I actually didn't communicate that much with my parents, because I had a conflictual relationship at times. They didn't know Gurudev had already given me the advice to learn to control my anger, and I was already getting mastery over that. So I was already gaining a lot of mastery. So my husband and I don't have any violent story to share at all. And we have very little harm that we have done to each other in the last 27 years. I wouldn't say none, because all relationships have harm and you go through waves and face difficulties and challenges, but minimal compared to a lot of couples. There's just not that much between us. But now that I am really established in Ahimsa, now that I am, I can watch Vikings, I can watch, Game of Thrones, I can watch like the Black Sails, I can watch the worst of the worst. I can listen to like the most violent hip hop rap and it doesn't touch me because I stay in constant awareness of that light, of that peace and the bliss and the truth of who I am within. Both the absolute and the light of consciousness stays within me. So I don't get as affected by it, right? So it's different. So it hasn't, watching all those things, I'm not immediately more irritable or, have more violent tendencies. But at first, when you're training yourself, stay away. Love those things from afar. Keep them at a distance until you're strong.
How do you reconcile the two stories of the guy who goes in the cave to stay away from anger, right, or try to deal with anger, and then it needs to be tested?
Yeah,
actually,
it does.
To this second one of like, well, just avoid it.
Yeah.
How do you?
Just go visit
Yeah.
your family.
Yeah, exactly. Families are the best litmus tests. Your children, your significant other, your parents, they're the best triggers for all that kind of stuff, like how well you're actually doing. But on the spiritual path, we need to have litmus tests. We need to have these times where we go in to meditate, we go into practice, and then we come out to interact and see how we're doing. And we go in to silence and we come back out. So we have this dance between practice and how am I doing, right? So you can have your spiritual buddies, give you feedback, but when you come out into society, even into Shivananda Hall sometimes, you don't even have to go visit your family, sometimes you can.
Spiritual family is enough.
Yeah. And for those of us who have lived here for, 45 years or whatever, that is our spiritual family. So, we have all these stories that we share together and stuff. But that's how you go into silence and stillness and practice, and then you come out into relationship so that you're sure that you're doing okay. And I like Sita's comment, visit your family. When you really think you're good, like watch the news, and then you didn't get triggered by the news, and you managed to stay calm and peaceful, then go visit your family. See what happens. Although, sometimes you cannot visit your family at all, because abuse is never okay. And if you have a family that is truly abusive, going to visit your family isn't such a great idea. They don't need to change. They're not necessarily going to change. Even though we all agree that abuse and neglect is wrong, right? We cannot change anybody but ourselves. So even though we have become quite skilled in our own mastery of our own attitude and our own mind and our own emotions, and being able to ride that wave and surf the wave of our emotions, right? If we know that our family is abusive, stay away.
So how does that relate to bear insult, bear injury?
Okay.
That's a conversation.
Yeah, how does that relate to bear insult, bear injury? Because we are in human form, and we're going to experience the full palette of human experience, so every emotion is going to be on the table, right? It's all going to be happening within us at all times. Bearing insult and bearing injury is tapasya. That is when you don't go looking for any feedback. You're not going, I'm going to go to Shivananda Hall and test and see how I'm doing. You walk into Mandala Cafe, somebody's having a bad day, and they scream at you because you got mud on your shoes. I don't know, I'm making that up. But you know what I mean? Anything like that. You put your shoes in the wrong spot and somebody yells at you about your shoes being at the wrong spot, or you get in line at the lunch thing and you accidentally cut in front of somebody and they glare at you. Bearing that unsolicited, right? You didn't ask for it. They probably weren't consciously thinking of giving that to you. It was just unconscious on their part. So you just bear it. You accept the pain of that suffering. You recognize that someone is reacting from a place of pain and suffering themselves, and you don't retaliate. You don't defend yourself. You don't get them back. Now, if it's somebody that you have a choice about, right? We don't always have a choice. But if it's somebody that we have a choice of avoiding, it's better to avoid it if we can, until we're strong.
It's supposed to be highest sadhana.
Yes, bearing insult, bear injury is our highest sadhana. But Guru never said abuse and neglect was okay. That's a boundary. And when we are clear with our boundaries, when we're really clear with the stay, and we're like, you know what? I am not going to have relationships where people physically abuse me. I am not going to be in relationships where people scream at me in anger. I'm not going to be in relationships where people, repeatedly shut down and neglect me and pretend like I'm dead to them, right? I'm not going to, when you set that boundary of asteya, it still might happen to you sometimes, because we're in the world. There are 8 billion people here, right? Not everybody's got the same skill level. So you still might have moments where people are acting in a way that causes harm to you. But your trick is to pasya. You feel that fully without wanting to hurt them back. So it's like you're bearing that pain and suffering without causing harm in return. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But when we start to say no, consciousness is listening. Is anyone uncomfortable with the word God? Raise your hand if you are, because I talk to a lot of different types of people in a lot of different settings, and many people are triggered by the word God, so I sometimes avoid it. But basically, the energy that has created all this, the light that is this manifestation, this projection of our mind, this shared experience of reality, right? There's a quality to that when we say no, that's heard. The yamas and niyamas, especially the yamas, are called universal laws because they're telling you how our universe works. This is how our universe works. You cause harm, harm is going to happen to you. Don't speak your truth, don't have the courage to speak your truth or lie, that's going to come back and hurt you, right? You don't respect boundaries, you don't know how to understand consent, that's going to harm you, right? You don't choose moderation, you choose some kind of addictive behavior or excessive behavior, that's going to harm you, right? You don't share your extras, that's going to come back and harm you. It's telling you, the yamas are telling you, on the level of duality, forget about enlightenment or total freedom. On the level of duality, how do you master the game of life? How do you get to have the best human experience that you can possibly have? And asteya is one of them. Saying no. Saying no. I am not going to be in an abusive relationship. I'm going to leave. And I'm choosing that because I don't believe anyone deserves that kind of treatment. Not just me. None of us deserve that. Right? Now, does it mean it still might happen to us? Certainly. If we're yogis, we believe in reincarnation. We believe in prarabdha karma. We believe that there's this karma that we come into this life and that it's expressing in this human form in this life. That's the karma that's unexpected, that we didn't do anything to deserve, right? So we're still going to have some of that residual from past experiences. And if we're sitting here at an ashram, we've had a lot of past experiences, right? You have to basically get to the bottom of your bucket list of everything you want to experience in life, every combination of being victim and perpetrator, of every combination of every human experience, before you get to the point where, you know what, I've had enough experience, enough of this experience, I want liberation. Now I'm done. Freedom or bust, right? But you have to get to the end of your bucket list. So you're going to have some experiences still in this life, right? It's from the past. But when you say no, it sets a boundary. People feel it. My husband is very quiet and very kind. The gentlest, kindest person other than my daughter that I know, literally. He is so gentle and so kind. And his energy is totally, you can feel his energy. Like when he walks in the room, people don't fight with him. People don't argue with him. People don't, he's tall, but also he has this energy about him where he's like, you don't cross my boundaries. Nobody crosses my boundaries unless I invite you in. He has that presence about him. And that comes from being comfortable with that. Right? Oh. So any other examples of how you've used your own techniques to master ahimsa in thought, word, or deed? Anybody have their own example?
I don't have a direct example, but I think for me, it just came with the practice. Like, it wasn't like I was like, ahimsa, I have to master this. But I think with practice, all of the yamas and the niyamas just kind of fall into place. And for me, the one that actually really became one of my practices here was tapasya. Was when I see somebody, when I'm getting agitated or activated by someone's action, I just see that person as an instrument for me to learn the lesson that I needed to learn. So instead of like passing blame to that person, I'm analyzing myself and trying to understand where is this emotion, where is this agitation coming from, and just allowing myself to sit with that.
Yeah, I like that.
So I think just for me, it just comes with the practice, so it becomes more natural.
And you use each opportunity where you feel triggered as a tool to help you learn and grow from that. Beautiful, Ami. That's beautiful. That's nice. So there's another completely non-analytical technique to ahimsa. And this one I heard Nalini Chelaram say, and it's, what would love do? In each moment, if you ask yourself, what would I do if I unconditionally loved this person? What would I do? Not the love that we are trained to believe is love and we're programmed to believe is love. Because a lot of times people will say, I love you, and then hit you. Or say, I love you, and then lock you in your bedroom. Or say, I love you, and then break up with you, or cheat on you, or lie to you. Right? We're not talking about that relativistic love or, that kind of thing. We're talking about real love, like unconditional, universal love, like a unitive consciousness event, a oneness kind of thing. What would I do if I really loved this person? Right? We would not harm. If we really loved ourselves and we really loved others, we would never want to harm anyone with our thought, word, or deed. Right? Our intention would always be selfless. We'd always be like, oh, I love you. Think about someone that you love, really, really love, a pet or, a child or a parent or a friend or something. If you think about that deepest, most unconditional love in your life, you would never intentionally hurt that other being. So if you apply that technique, it's more of a bhakti yogi technique, but if you apply that technique, it's easier to figure out what to do, right? And again, if you apply that technique, which, by the way, that technique that I taught you about, the emotion arising, labeling it, using the breath to stay grounded and resilient, and letting it pass, was what came after Gurudeva called me and said, learn to control your anger. I was in meditation one day and I was like, I need to learn to do this. I don't know how. I have no instructions. I've never tried to control my anger in my life. And this came to me. This came just in a meditation. And then I started practicing it in real time. So I'm sharing with you the wisdom that came out of that teaching of saying, learn to do this. So there's a lot of different ways based on different ways our mind works. If you take a jnana yogi approach, right, where you're saying, who am I, constantly, and you're just keep letting go of all your identification of who I am, who are you, who are you, who are you, until you're to the center of the peeled onion and there's nothing in there, right? It's all gone in the middle. Then if you take that approach, this is just a projection of your mind. It's not real anyway. It's not who you are. You're not this body. You're not this mind. You're not the emotions. You're not this projection of reality, right? You are vast, unknown, unknowable. infinite potential. And if you take that approach, then it becomes unimportant. Any experience that you have is such a blip on the timeline of existence of humanity and the existence of all reality. And, it's just like, it's irrelevant. When you realize you're not that, then you talk yourself out of being triggered because you're like, this is not real anyway. This is a projection of my mind. I'm not this. And so then it's like the emotion has nothing to cling on to. It still may arise and pass, but it has nothing to grab onto. It can't grasp anything. So there's a lot of different ways to apply these simple techniques. A lot of different approaches, depending on the nature of your mind and your propensity and how your biology works and the way your mind works.